Yanis, Corporate Affairs Director at Bank of Cyprus, and Dr. Kostas Williamos, Rector of the European University Cyprus, for a discussion with Mr. Sadik on the same topic.
Hi, Mr. Sadik. Welcome to your virtual presence in Cyprus, at least. That was very interesting. If I dare say, actually fascinating discussion on a very difficult
Sorry, I'm
issue.
just waiting for the questions to come through.
Can you hear me? Am I coming through? No. Hi. Hopefully you can hear me now. Can I have you nod if you can hear me, Mr. Sadik? That's a no. Um, okay. Okay. I'll toss Mr. Williams the ball until we get voice to Mr. Sadiq. I think he's having a technical issue. I think there's little doubt right now that we need quite desperately in most businesses around the world more diversity, and I think there's some very honest efforts carried out out there. But there's always one question about a certain sense of sensitivity and the difficulty in navigating sensitivities that we don't always know are there. So a lot of the time we do see people in our work environment trying to be nice and coming across very rude. And that's always an issue that blocks people from trying to reach out. Mr. Sadiq said, the little things you do matter more than anything else. Saying good morning matters more than anything else. But a lot of the time, there comes a point, we see that in colleagues and staff, they're afraid to reach out because of that absence of a comfort zone. How do you feel about that?
First of all, I would like to thank you very much for being with you in this quite important digital conference. We live in a digital world, and I like to mention the fact that in 10 years from now, we will enter not the digital world, but a quantum technology. So we have to prepare, for this because it's a huge change. It requires, different approach. Anyway, at the same time, I like to congratulate the presentation of Asif. I think his presentation was very good and gives to us, points for thought, food for thought. Allow me, corresponding to your question, allow me to start from a different angle or different approach by indicating the fact for an emancipatory type of approach towards this type of things. What I like to say, for instance, that we talk about diversity, inclusion, whatever, but all these type of things respond to a compilation and fragmentary type of actions that organizations, public or private need or so. To me, the biggest issue of our time is about democracy. Democracy in terms of economy, democracy in terms of culture, in politics, and social. We have four, I would say, pillars that we need to reinvade democracy. At this point, I'd like to mention the fact that Gallup, and all of us, we know what Gallup is. Gallup reports that American companies have a loss of $300 billion annually because of disengaged workers, which is an astronomical loss if we consider that. 300 billion annually, it's huge. So this complies with whatever I have said previously, and to some extent corresponds to your question. In other words, we have in a pandemic, a post-pandemic period, to reinvade culture, democracy in 4 levels of the life world, the so-called life world, in economy, in politics, in cultural fields, and of course in social levels. Otherwise, we can talk about, as I said, things about taking certain actions, but these actions are including inclusion and diversity. All these type of things, correspond to compilation and fragmentary type of actions.
That's a very interesting point. I'd like to toss that ball to Mr. Sadiq. One of the questions that keep arising about diversity and about the corporate role or corporate citizenship role in society is the question, should we take a public stance on issues that we feel matter in whatever society where our addressable market is in? That's not always a very easy question, and it's definitely a difficult proposition to get through boardrooms. Whether you are, sharing a tweet from a competitor or taking a firm stance yourself on your own accord. I think we're past the point of Republicans buy sneakers as well, but how do you think we can design these messages in taking that risky step of making that stance for democracy, for equality, for diversity in our societies, which is beyond our business and may very well cost the loss of some customers. We do see churn rates, whether it's Ben & Jerry's or Adidas for that matter, or Nike for that matter. We've seen these stances being made. I think your thoughts on this, I would say imperative or not imperative, would be very, very interesting.
Definitely. No, thank you, and I think it's some really important sort of questions, I guess, and I think we're living in a time and an age where we cannot necessarily differentiate. And I still remember myself, and maybe I'm giving away my age here, but when work was separate to your social life and your home life and so on. But as you see generations changing, consumer trends, all those kind of things, they're all based on not just that people will buy a product. I mean, I would buy a product just because it's convenient. People now buy a product if it's sustainable, if the company aligns to their social values, if they see the company as being fair and just. And I think that's the world that we're now almost sort of moving into. And I think there's a huge element of how do we, as companies and organizations, ensure that we are adapting to the consumer needs of the future, because where competition increases, whatever industry, whatever business we look at, what are going to be the differentiators? I remember when I used to work at EY, I still remember losing a very big contract to one of our competitors, and when we asked for feedback from the company that we lost the contract from, they said that you didn't present a very diverse team, although your pitch was the best. And we were like, but if our pitch was the best, we should have got the business. And they were like, no, we're being held to account by our shareholders around diversity and diversity of our suppliers. So if we don't see that in you, we're not going to give you the business. And it's things like that. So I think society is changing. I think it's going to be crucial how we create this sense or this environment where we can where people can align and feel that that link to a brand, to a product, to a company, where it's just more than a service. People will want more. People will demand more.
I think you touched a raw nerve there for a lot of people, and you mentioned the dreaded word shareholders. And you talked a little bit about the little things we can do in our everyday life at work, and how important these are in breaking down barriers and expanding our comfort zone in a more diverse environment. But how important is it at the same time for that tone to come from the top, from the point of view of a boardroom, from the point of view of the senior management? Because we do have another stakeholder, which is our shareholders, and the belief, and we don't necessarily need to agree with that, but the general belief is that when we take a stance on social issues, we do that to the benefit of society and our customers, but very often to the detriment of our shareholders. So how important is it to get the right tone from the top, and what's the role of shareholder voice in all this?
Yeah, I think the tone from the top, firstly, is a huge piece. We need to get the tone from the top right. So if we do not, we can't live and breathe values which leaders don't display. And that's why I was talking about the sort of authentic leadership, what we want to see from leaders. And I think, again, people want to see the leaders speaking about different elements of diversity. They want to see them embracing the importance of inclusion. And unless the leaders display that, they're then missing on a huge piece of that leadership element. Now, when you look at shareholders, if we take that as an example of, for any big company, our shareholders in themselves are diverse. Yes, people, and this is where I think if we link the two, we ensure that we look at diversity and inclusion as not only the right moral thing to do, the right social thing to do, the right thing for our consumers, our staff, but also it being a business imperative that it can generate better income for us, it can generate more profitability and all those things that everyone aspires to. Then we're looking at success, right? That's the piece that if we can achieve that and we can really truly gain that, then we've got success. And I think it's really important. But one final point though, I think it's not just the tone from the top, it has to flow throughout the organization, right? Because what usually happens is you'll get leaders saying all the right thing, but it's a message that's distant to staff. They hear it, but it's not felt by them, or people in the mid-career point in their organization, which is usually the difficult point to reach. They feel, oh, we're too busy, we've got too many other things to worry about, this can't, I'll do it when I get time. The message has to be across the piece, across the organization, and really championed from a personal perspective as well. So, people need to own it, not just the leaders, because if the leaders own it, it doesn't flow and it will not bring about change.
Right, and in the middle of your sentence there, it struck me that the phrase you used in your presentation, business imperative. I think it really is the root of whatever may grow as we go along. Mr. Williams, the shareholder role is very important in forcing these decisions. But as we go down the hierarchy, and you talked about hierarchies a little bit, Mr. Sadiq, but as we go down the hierarchy, we find a lot of, not veto points, but a lot of silencers, a lot of buffers to these attitudes trickling down.
Allow me to say that the fact that we describe a structure that corresponds to a great extent to industrial society. Right. Now we're talking about digital society, and in 10 years from now, we have to talk about the quantum society. So we definitely need a completely different type of organizational structure than the one that we have experienced up to date. So that's why I said at the beginning, we have to reinvade democracy within organizations. Usually we talk about democracy and we refer to political system. No, it's not let's say, the ultimate, let's say, the most important thing or factor. So what we have to do is to establish democracy within organizations. It's not just accidental, the fact that there are now dozens of examples of democracy in the workplace among well-known firms. And that's why Gallup reports that American companies lost $3 billion dollars annually. This is astronomical. We have to realize that.
You think the trick for making diversity work is, Mr. Sadik, it's changing the you talked about structures a little bit. Is the actual hierarchical or flat, depending on how you design a business, but is the actual operating model in terms of the hierarchy material to encouraging diversity, new ideas, different ideas, avoiding groupthink, breaking down these barriers? We don't really often think about the mechanics of our organizational charts as a big part of the problem.
Yeah.
But perhaps the actual, the little boxes and tree diagrams on organizational organizational charts may be part of what the problem actually is. And I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but I think that's a very interesting point that deserves.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things is for us to truly achieve success in this space, it can't be. Ideally, you don't need people like me in organizations, right? That's the dream. That's the goal, because it shouldn't be one person's job or even a team's job. It should be everyone's role and responsibility. And to do that, we need to build it in to that thinking, so that it's not a secondary thing, or it's not a thing that I mentioned, that we do on the side when we have a bit of time. It should come naturally to us. So if we're designing, we're putting together a new project, we should think diversity as part of it, not as an extra. It should just be part of our thought process. That's when we'll achieve true success, because otherwise the danger is, if we don't see it in that way, it becomes what I call a box ticking exercise. We'll do the 5 minutes because we have to for diversity's sake, and let's move on to doing business.
So
and we can't have it separated.
Out of the office.
Exactly.
Rather than something visceral that we do in our everyday lives.
Exactly. We need to really build it into what we do and what we try to drive forward in every part. And if leaders do that, if managers do that, if individuals do that, then we start making it second nature to everyone. It's not a thought process then. Then it's true, it's weaved in. Because the danger, and I'll be honest with you, the danger, even when you look at having specific actions, is people will complete actions. And when they complete actions, then they can file that away till next year, because now it's done. And diversity is, and there's a statement I use quite a lot, diversity is not a problem we're trying to solve. It's an opportunity we're trying to embrace. So if it's an opportunity we're trying to embrace, there's no end date. It continues. It's a continuous opportunity. But when we see or think, how do I solve diversity, or how do I solve the problems of diversity, we will never reach an end date, because we'll just put small interventions that will only help in the short term, but won't have long sustainable change.
May I interrupt?
Yes, absolutely.
That's exactly, we need to establish a culture.
100%.
Culture of core values that includes, values of inclusion and diversity. A core value. We have to create a map, so to speak, of core values that include actions and service, democracy and participation, transparency, accountability. You know that, in organizations is extremely important. Respect for human rights with dignity, equal opportunity for all. All these are core, I would say, values. And when we come, to the issue of inclusion, even if we include, in our discourse, organizations, and we include corporate organizations or public organizations, definitely what we need What we have to have in our minds when we talk about inclusion is social inclusion, political inclusion, cultural
Exactly.
inclusion, and
Hmm.
of course, economic inclusion.
Of course.
These are interrelated aspects. We cannot separate them. Otherwise, we're going again to create fragmentary type of actions, which are not for the benefit and for the well-being, of working people or so.
I mean, this discussion inevitably, I think, brings us back to the U.S. around the 60s, and the separate but equal clauses, and that whole discussion. And I think there's also a sense of awkwardness, a sense of unease. Do you think we should talk about diversity, or should we be color and gender blind and blind to sexual preferences or any other kind of breakdown we might want people? Or do we just do we talk about these things? Is it better to address them openly and say, we're not diverse if you look at these 2 or 3 or 1 groups in this division or in this corporation? Or is the aim to make it a known issue? I always like to say, I don't know for how many women I voted in the last parliamentary elections because I didn't pay attention to gender. And I don't know if that's the right thing to do, because a lot of the time you see a lot of negative reaction to that. Are we aiming toward a diversity blind attitude, or are we? Is it better, do you think, to explicitly talk about these things and explicitly say, when it comes to sexual orientation or gender or height or color or whatever it is, we need to explicitly address these with a sense of purpose? It's
I,
sometimes difficult to tell what works best. So
yeah, and I think
I think that's a very interesting discussion to have.
yeah, and I think very valid points actually, and there's I think there's 2 elements to it, right? So I think we should treat people. The truth is, we don't want to label people based on the diversity that they carry, right? So when we promote a senior leader who's female, we've promoted her because she's good,
Right.
because she's a leader in technology. She's bringing, whatever new innovation. When we label it with we've promoted a senior woman, it automatically sounds like we only did it because we wanted a woman and she doesn't bring anything else to the table. So there's that element. So it is important to celebrate or to look at people as individuals. And even for the individuals, they don't necessarily want to be felt like, I don't want someone to say that I've got, a job because we needed diversity. I don't want to be recognized for the diversity, because what you might see, firstly, might be wrong, because that might not be the diversity that's important to me. And actually, in all honesty, in my case, I've got a very young family, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. That's my biggest challenge, diversity-wise, at the moment, managing that.
Right.
But no one sees that, because they go by what they see on my face, on my color of my skin, and assume that's the challenge. On the flip side, the problem is if we're completely colorblind or blind to diversity in that respect, is the challenge that we forget that sometimes our own privileges afford us certain opportunities. So I could be as fair as possible, but I know as a man, I have certain advantages that society will give me automatically. Now, unless I acknowledge and understand that and create more equity and fairness for those groups who don't have that, it can become more difficult. So it's a fine balance in my mind. So I couldn't agree with you more, but I think it's how do we balance it? So we want to acknowledge that I'm given, or you are given, or others might have some privilege over others. But what we don't want to do is point out and say, ooh, now we've got a woman there, or we've got someone, from this sexual orientation or whatever. We don't want to do that, but we want to acknowledge that actually, we might have some advantages that others don't.
Williams, I think it's an interesting.
Just to elaborate on it, I'm glad, but I like, to add to our discussion, apart, from the concept of democracy that we need, taking into account the post-pandemic period, and also the fact that we're going to enter in 10 years from now, the quantum-oriented society or technology. I think we have to establish, and foster a culture that accepts diversity and enables diverse human resources to play an active role. This type of culture should take into account, the promotion of active participation of women, encouraging greater understanding of human rights in all levels, promoting active participation of disabled people within organizations, promoting active participation of global human resources, and finally, supporting the work-life balance, which is critical in our time, particularly in the pandemic period, if you take into account, this. Anyway, the other issue that I like to raise, in our discussion is strictly related to a question. For instance, what are the barriers to whatever we discuss? I think there are many, and we have to tackle them. But we have to tackle them not, with structures that we know right now, hierarchically speaking or so and so or so on. We need, again, democratic and cultural concepts, in order to tackle, questions regarding barriers to this process. There are organizational barriers, there are attitudinal barriers. You said, Michalis, at the beginning of your introduction, the attitude, okay. Communication barriers, and of course environmental, and so on and so on. So.
Well, I don't think we can exhaust
The whole
question
issue.
of diversity in the time we have, and my understanding from the nods from up the seats is that we've run out of time. But I think in my mind at least, the idea that organizational mechanics actually plays a role in how we deal with diversity is something I will take with me from this discussion. And I will come back to a phrase used by Mr. Sadik a couple of times, which is it's business imperative. It's not about feeling nice about ourselves. It's not about ticking the boxes. It's not about being nice. It is business. It is a business imperative. It is important for our efficiency, for breaking groupthink, for breaking through barriers in the way we think and the way we approach our business and our customers, our revenue streams, the service we provide to the addressable market in which we function. And that relates a lot to the tone from the top, not only the senior management, but from the stock exchanges where our shareholders decide our fate. So I think I will definitely take that with me after this discussion. Business imperative, I think, is something we need to keep in mind. And I want to thank you both, Mr. Sadik. I think that was an excellent presentation, and thank you for your thoughts. Mr. Williams, thank you. We will close this at this point. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a very interesting discussion.